Oh, you want to play psycho killer? Can I be the helpless victim?
Cross your eyes and scream, man. Scream for your life.
Welcome, Scream Queens, Kings, and Things. Whether you're screaming at movies or the real life stuff, I'm your host, Jenica Olin. This is, I think, my 53rd episode. I got it wrong last time. Last week was 53rd. This is my 54th episode. I'm covering horror movies with representations of indigenous people. The film I'm covering today is an imperfect representation of the Windigo legend from Algonquian cultures, notably Cree and Anishinaabe people. The legend serves as a cautionary tale reinforcing community, moderation, and survival ethics against the dangers of isolation, selfishness, and insatiable greed, particularly in the harsh northern winter environment. A human typically transforms into a Wendigo after resorting to cannibalism, during a severe famine, or by succumbing to extreme greed. It can also be the result of a spirit possessing a person. Descriptions vary, but common characteristics include an emaciated, gaunt appearance with ash-gray skin pulling tightly over the bones, deeply sunken eyes, and a heart of ice. It often gives off an eerie odor of decay. In Ojibwe and Cree lore, Wendigos are often described as giants that grow in proportion to the amount of human flesh they consume, meaning they are perpetually starving and never full. The Wendigo is an embodiment of gluttony, excess, and the destruction of the environment. It symbolizes the consequences of losing one's humanity and the importance of living in balance with nature and the community. Driven by an insatiable hunger for human flesh, the Wendigo is a relentless hunter, capable of incredible speed and strength. It can also invoke feelings of intense greed and desire to commit murder and cannibalism in those who fall under its influence, essentially infecting a community with evil. The story is a form of moral education, emphasizing communal values and the need for resource sharing to survive the brutal northern winters. The legend helps to define moral social behavior and warns against the dangers of individualism and taking too much. Modern popular culture often misrepresents the Wendigo, sometimes depicting it with antlers or horns, features generally absent from the original indigenous story, or reducing it to a stereotypical monster. Within indigenous communities, it remains a respected and feared spiritual presence with deep cultural significance. Today, I will be covering the 1999 film Ravenous, directed by Antonia Bird, written by Ted Griffin, starring Robert Carlyle, Jeffrey Jones, and Guy Pearce. Estimated budget was $12 million. Estimated gross was $2 million. The tagline for this film is, "You are who you eat." They lost a lot of money on this one, and it deserved better than it got. Some quick trivia about this film. It is partially and very loosely inspired by the Donner Party disaster of 1847. The writer Ted Griffin got the idea for the film while reading Dashiell Hammett's The Thin Man. The film takes place in 1847 during the Mexican-American War. The film inspired the lyrics to the song The First Supper by noise rock band Daughters. Writer Ted Griffin and original director Milcho Maciejewski wanted to cast Tom Waits as Private Cleves, but their choice was overridden by then-president of Fox, Laura Ziskin, who hired David Arquette based on his popularity in Scream. Vegetarian Guy Pearce underwent multiple takes of him eating the life-saving Knox stew, which was, in fact, a very nice lamb stew prepared by the film's caterers, chomping into large chunks of meat and then spitting them out as soon as Antonia Bird called cut. The end fight was made up by actors Guy Pearce and Robert Carlyle, when the original script ending, which was to take place on the roof of the cabin at night, while it was burning, was scrapped in favor of them just beating the hell out of each other. During this, the production ran out of fake blood. It's an epic scene. If you're new here, each episode will have an intro, brief synopsis of the movie, and an analysis of the film. Spoiler alert, I've made it my job to spoil the shit out of this movie. Let's set the scene with the synopsis of the movie.
Captain John Boyd is about to discover
no one just ends up at Fort Spencer. We come for a reason.
Yours being?
Well,
something he never imagined.
we have a great sense of camaraderie here at Fort Spencer.
It's this Indian scout told me a curious story.
Windigo.
It's an old Indian myth from the north.
Man eats the flesh of another. He absorbs the other man's strength.
Now, one man must choose
We need others.
between having dinner
Not me.
and being dinner.
Set in 1840s during the aftermath of the Mexican-American War, Ravenous follows Captain John Boyd, a U.S. Army officer whose cowardice unexpectedly leads to a battlefield victory. As punishment, to keep him out of sight, Boyd is reassigned to Fort Spencer, a remote, ragtag military outpost in the Sierra Nevadas. Life at the fort is isolated and uneventful until a frostbitten stranger named Calhoun stumbled into the camp. He tells a horrific story. He had been traveling with a group who became trapped in the mountains. As their food ran out, the group turned to cannibalism, led by a murderous man named Colonialism. Calhoun claims he barely escaped with his life. The soldiers organize a rescue mission, but the deeper they go into the mountains, the more Boyd senses something isn't right. The truth emerges in a bloody reveal. Calhoun is actually Ives, and he lured them there as food.
How many did he say was in the party? 6, right?
Why?
Who's this? Ives. Oh, Jesus.
It's a trap!
He's become something supernatural, akin to a Wendigo. Eating human flesh grants him superhuman strength, healing, and an insatiable hunger. One by one, the soldiers are killed. Boyd survives only by reluctantly eating human flesh himself, which gives him enough strength to escape and return to the fort, but not without consequences. The hunger follows him. Back at Fort Spencer, Ives resurfaces with a horrifying proposal. The two of them, now both tainted by cannibalism, should join forces and turn the failing fort into a feeding ground. Together, they could recruit others and grow stronger.
It's not so difficult, really. Acquiescence. It's easy, actually. You just give in. Okay. Oh well. Then you die.
Boyd refuses, leading to the film's vicious final confrontation. The two men battled brutally across the fort, each trying to kill the other before one can heal and regenerate. Boyd ultimately sacrifices himself to ensure Ives dies with him, trapping them in a bear trap and letting it crush them both. As they bleed out together, Ives taunts Boyd, "If you die first, I'm definitely going to eat you. But the question is, if I die, what are you going to do? Bon appetit. Eat or die?" The film ends on a darkly ironic note, questioning whether the cycle of violence and hunger ever truly ends.
Ravenous.
Bon appetit.
Now it's time to talk horror. I am actually solo today. This is a really busy time of the year for people, so I have had 2 guests that just something came up. And then, quite honestly, I am a vocal person about the causes that I back and all these things. So So I get pushed back. I will say that there are people who are, maybe afraid to work with me at this point, but they still support me from the sidelines, like as shadow people. I'm just saying, like, there's some fuck shit happening within the horror community. There is a lot of white supremacy happening. And that's exactly why I'm covering this topic. We haven't learned our lessons. And this movie is actually kind of like a perfect metaphor for the people that are at the top, that like nothing is good enough. Nothing can suffice them. They're just going to keep going and consuming and wanting more. And, there's not enough land. There's not enough people. To suffice their appetite for power. And I don't understand that. I honestly don't understand that. I don't have that in me. If anything, I want to make myself smaller in certain ways, but also bigger. Yeah, so I'm solo today, so I'm going to be breaking apart this movie into the themes. So let's get into these themes. So Ravenous 1999, we've got cannibalism as metaphor for American expansion. At its core, Ravenous uses cannibalism as a dark metaphor for the violent hunger that fueled Western expansion. The film is set shortly after the Mexican-American War, already a narrative of conquest, manifest destiny, and territorial dominance. Cannibalism becomes symbolism of how the American military and settlers consume land, people, and resources for the sake of national growth. The ending of this movie is probably the best example of that, whenever they are thinking about making that outpost into a way to not only find victims, but also recruit people and expand on their cannibalistic ways. It's like very dark, and we have Boyd who sacrifices himself. He knows that he's got to end this, and he doesn't want to continue living on in that way. So he sacrifices himself. So the setting for this is actually taken from the Donner Party. The backstory for Calhoun and Colonial Ives is very similar to the story of Alfred Packer, the Colorado cannibal, who, as a member of a party of 6 men lost in the Colorado Rockies during a harsh winter, emerged in the spring thaw. He also reported that one of his companions had gone mad and killed the others after the meat from the first person that starved to death ran out. And it was later believed it was him who had somehow overpowered and killed and ate all 5 men. Recently, science has cast doubt on his guilt. Packer was also a military man. Lastly, Robert Carlyle, in stature as well as hair, bears a more than passing resemblance to Alfred Packer. Coincidence? I think not. So we've got our manifest destiny and corruption of power. The villain Ives embodies the ideology of manifest destiny, that consuming or destroying others is justified if it leads to progress and power. He frames cannibalism as a strengthening, a way to become more American, echoing the rhetoric of survival of the fittest, taming the wilderness, or the right to take what you want because you can. The film critiques this ideology by showing that the people who believe in it are the true monsters. When Ives says morality, the last bastion of a coward, the line is paraphrasing. In an inverted manner, someone said that patriotism is the last refuge of a coward. Both ideas imply nobility, just on the opposite side of the spectrum. One being that horrible behavior can be justified or excused depending on the circumstances. In the film's context, Ives is stating that traditional ideas of morality have no meaning and are useless in a remote frontier world. Isolation, madness, and the frontier. The frontier setting is harsh, isolating, and morally disorienting. With no oversight, law, or community, characters reveal their worst impulses. The wilderness becomes a psychological battlefield as much as a physical one. It connects to classic frontier horror tropes, but ties them specifically to military expansion. We see this a lot with the Boyd character. They really think that he has gone insane. They question everything he tells them, and they want to punish him for letting them know, like, hey, that's Ives. That's the guy that ate people. And they're like, no, no, no. He didn't eat anyone. Let's check for scars. And while Boyd's story is very out there, I don't know if I would believe it if I was one of those soldiers. I would probably be like, this person lost their fucking mind too. But he was right. And Boyd kind of serves as our moral compass within this film. We see that he has a hard time with eating the meat. We've got that stew at the end, and he does not want to eat it, but he's also getting so weak. He knows that if he doesn't eat it, he is going to die. He's going to die, and these people are going to be the ones that are there to continue doing what they're doing. So it's really interesting that he was actually a vegetarian, because it makes it that much more believable when he has to eat this meat that he does not want to eat. He does not want that meat in his mouth. He chews it up, he spits it out after each take, but you can just see on his face like the grotesque, like he really does not want to eat that. If he wasn't a vegetarian, he would probably be like salivating at this like delicious lamb meal that it actually was. But he is vegetarian, so his reaction was very genuine. The beginning of the movie is very much, as I already mentioned, inspired by the Donner Party, echoing that isolation and the moral distortion that comes with survival. When you are stripped down to your basic human needs to survive, everything else is tuned out. There is no moral compass. You become animalistic. And in the end, we are all animals, just saying. When it comes to this film, the body, the flesh, it's all symbolism for something more. This movie isn't just about people being cannibals and they got hungry so they're eating each other. The cannibalism is so much more than gore. It's about the violation of bodies, the commodification of human life, and the use of bodies, dead or alive, for military gain. We see this at the beginning as well. Boyd is on a battleground and he plays dead. He's essentially seen as a coward, which is really sad for him because now he has to explain, like, how did everyone else die and he survived? And it's like that mentality of, you know, you're supposed to die on the sword. You're not supposed to let your men die beside you and do nothing. You're a coward is basically the rhetoric for anyone who survives in a situation like this. And then when it comes out that he was able to survive by pretending he was dead and being at the bottom of a stack of bodies, everyone is shocked. They're mortified. They also, it's like a shame that they want to push to the side. And that's why they send him to this outpost. But the interesting thing that I saw was the fact that Boyd did not have energy. Like when he's at the bottom of that body pit, he is almost dead and he would have died if it wasn't for the blood that trickles down and into his mouth. And that blood gives him just enough energy for him to get out and then fight back. So he kind of redeems himself by getting that revenge. He's able to win that outpost no matter how cowardly he got there, which before he consumed that flesh, though, he was very weak. He was a coward to them. So cannibalism in this instance is a metaphor for being stronger and more efficient. The blood that trickles into his mouth and he is consuming, whether willingly or not, literally gives him the power to take over. Cannibalism, in this case, literally powers the empire. But power comes at a cost. It's addictive and it comes with moral decay. So once a character tastes human flesh, the hunger becomes insatiable, mirroring addiction, corruption, and the intoxicating nature of power. There's a point in this movie where you know things are going to get real graphic. and real bad. When they're taking who they think is Calhoun back to the cave, they think that they're going to go rescue a woman who's like the last surviving person of this cannibalistic massacre. And they're sleeping in a tent, and the one guy had gotten wounded. He fell. He has a wound on his side. And then we have Ives that comes over and is licking him. He's licking his wound. He just can't help himself. He can't even get to the cave. He talked about cannibalism, and he talked about all these things that are like horrifying to these people who have been in somewhat of a sanctuary from the wilderness, from that kind of need. And he reveals himself to be the eater of flesh, the Windigo. And the native people keep telling them, they tell them about the legend of the Windigo and to be careful, and that the Windigo is never satisfied. He will always want more and more and more. And so this becomes that moment where they see like, oh, he smells blood and he's going to go for it. And to save himself in that moment, because he does not have his hunting grounds that he needs to be successful, he says, you know what? I am a problem. You're right. I was just tasting him, I think is what he said. He's like, I was just tasting him. And the guy is freaked out. The acting is so good in this movie. I would definitely, if I woke up to someone licking my wound, this is not the kind of licking your wound that you want. This isn't like lick your wounds and get up. This is like, I'm tasting the savory parts of you. So they end up putting him into ropes and making sure that he cannot harm anyone. But that only lasts so long. Basically, the more power you gain, the more you crave. This escalation directly parallels the way colonial violence escalates. At first, it was isolated. It was just in this cave. Now it's growing. And it's going to continue growing throughout the movie. This hunger, this need. Those really are the basic themes of this film. So I want to kind of get into the indigenous representation in Ravenous, because that's what I'm here for this month, is to talk about the indigenous representation, whether it is a good representation, authentic, or is it a bad, harmful representation. And these are good conversations to have. I'm going to be having it with myself, and you're my unwitting participant, or you're witting. You want to be here. You're here for a reason. You came here. I'm going to go through some of these representations, whether the Windigo was used the correct way or not, because when we're using other people's lore, their folklore, and their traditions, we should do it in a meaningful, mindful way. And I think that is attempted here, very much so. There's no malice or ill intent in this film with the way it's used, but it's not the best representation of what the Windigo is. It doesn't have horns, so that's good. So let's get into it. The indigenous representation in Ravenous is often misunderstood because it's subtle and intentionally contrast to the Euro-American characters. They have a very small role, and it's only at the beginning of the movie when we see the indigenous people. So we've got George and Martha are our indigenous characters as moral anchors. We have George, a scout, and his wife Martha. They serve as cultural and ethical counterpoints to the white soldiers. George represents knowledge of the land, a warming voice rooted in community ethics, the keeper of the Windigo story, used as a caution, not a weapon. He warns soldiers about the Windigo, but they ignore him, symbolizing how colonial powers ignored indigenous warnings about greed, imbalance, and destruction. Martha represents quiet resilience. We have an indigenous woman supporting a colonial outpost without any real recognition. She is an observer of the white chaos rather than a participant. She ultimately rejects Boyd, the protagonist, and leaves the fort, symbolizing a refusal of the indigenous people to be part of the colonial cycle of violence. Their role is very small at the beginning, but they do have authentic representation with using their language. They are advisors to the soldiers. They're guiding them through, but they're also being taken advantage of. They're a warning that is ignored. So they tell everyone at the outpost, they tell Boyd and Hart and Toffler that there's this evil out there. And when they hear Ives talking about the consumption of human flesh, they're like, this is not a good idea. This is the Wendigo. And the Wendigo is never satisfied. And they go through the story and they tell them and they warn them, but they're not listened to. So let's talk about the representation of the Wendigo and what's accurate and what's maybe inaccurate. And this is based off my own research online, so it could be inaccurate as well. So if you are an indigenous person and I don't get this right, there are different variations as well. So depending on the tribe, depending on the nation, they might have a different version of this, because it's notably the Cree and the Anishinaabe tribes that carry this legend of the Windigo, which they are both part of the Algonquian cultures. The movie heavily fictionalizes and stylizes the myth to fit their narrative, but the essence of the Windigo remains the same. The Windigo still represents greed, excess, and colonial consumption. It emerges during times of starvation or moral crisis. It is created through the violation of community ethics. You're not supposed to go eat your friends. You're not supposed to eat the soldiers you're outposted with. You're supposed to work together and find other solutions to your hunger and things like that. In indigenous traditions, the Wendigo is not simply a monster. It's a warning against consuming more than you need, destroying others for personal gain, and allowing greed to overtake humanity. So that's where we mainly get our disconnect, is going to be that in the movie, the Wendigo is shown as a monster, and in reality, the Wendigo is not simply a monster. To call it a monster would be to make it something otherworldly. And this is not something otherworldly. This is something that is within every one of us that we must fight against. We must make sure that we are being balanced, that we are not consuming more than we need, that we are not doing things only for personal gain, that we also think of others. And we have to make sure that our humanity is intact, which half this country does and half this country does not right now. The fact that the white American soldiers become Wendigo-like is meaningful. The film redirects a native teaching back onto the colonizers. At the end, we've got our fort. This is going to be our battleground. The fort is a symbol of colonization. Fort Spencer is a literal outpost of U.S. expansion built on indigenous land, dependent on indigenous labor, George and Martha. And this very much resembles what my guest in my last episode, Nikki, she talked about. The colonizers were upset with indigenous people when they didn't want to be treated like slaves, when they didn't want to be just free labor and advice. And there were these disagreements on being treated fairly. Instead of the white man treating them fairly, they're like, well, we're just going to murder you because you're complaining too loudly. And so this is what it was. This is how they were treated. They were treated like free labor. The indigenous people are essential to the fort's survival. Without them, they wouldn't know how to survive on that land. George is their primary advisor. They go to him and ask him questions about everything happening over there. They have very little knowledge of the land. Yet George and Martha are not the leaders. When they talk to him, there's this animosity and this like venom to it. Like, if you don't give us the information that we're looking for, there are going to be consequences for you. So it's evident that George is not just this like willing participant. While he isn't treated horribly per se, he isn't respected, and he does not have the same status even as the lowest ranking officer at that post. But you would think with the most knowledge, he could at least get some status, but no status. So he's sidelined, even though he's the most essential person in that outpost. So again, this mirrors real U.S. history. Indigenous knowledge helps sustain frontier settlements, while indigenous warnings went unheeded. We've got a difference in the perspective of what the Wendigo is. We have our indigenous view versus the colonial view. The indigenous view of the Wendigo is that it's a moral and spiritual warning against greed. But the colonial's view in the film is that it is a pathway to military power. They feel the power of the Wendigo and they want to embrace it. They don't want to shut it down. They want to continue feeding it. This contrast is the most striking commentary on colonialism. The colonizers turn a spiritual warning into a tool for domination. They don't read the warning label. All they do is they want to look at the pill bottle and say, oh, it's going to make me strong. Let me take this steroid or whatever it may be. And they don't care what the other consequences of that are. Your testicles are going to shrink. You're going to have a lower sperm count. Women are not going to want to be around you. You're going to be aggressive. What are some other things? Your voice is going to shrink. Yeah, we'll ignore those things and go for the big muscles. My final thought on the indigenous presence is that they are really just exposing. They are there to contrast and expose the moral decay within colonialism. The indigenous characters are not driving the plot. They're there at the beginning, and then they go away because they're like, we're not dealing with this. Martha's like, I'm getting the fuck out of here. I'm not going to be eaten by these people. My husband died because of them. They didn't listen to us. She's like, I'm out. Peace. She's like, I can go out here and survive on my own. You guys can't. So good for her. They serve as the cultural framework explaining the soldiers' degeneration. Their quiet moral clarity contrasts with the white soldiers' moral collapse. And the film ultimately argues that the Wendigo is colonial greed itself, not indigenous spirituality. This is not a mythical monster. This is something within you that if you feed it, it's going to grow and it will never be full. So that's it for my analysis on this movie. If you have not seen this movie, you can now go watch it with your eyes wide open to the themes within this film. If you have already seen it and you did not pick up on these things, you can go rewatch it and, maybe have a different perspective on this film. It is a really great movie. The acting is fantastic. I definitely suggest you seeing this if you haven't. Currently, you can only get it on Amazon Prime by renting it. And that's how I was able to get it. I believe I actually ended up purchasing it. All-star cast. It's really a shame that it did so poorly. New to streaming is The Creep Tape Season 2. The second season of it's a popular found footage series following a serial killer who hires victims to film him. It premiered on Shudder and AMC+. There's a new, funny, horror-tinged film. It's not really horror, but there are some elements of horror. It's called Eternity, and it has Elizabeth Olsen, Miles Teller, and Colum Turner. It follows a recently deceased woman who has 1 week in the afterlife to choose between her husband and her first love. I'm not really sure why this is a hard choice. If I have to choose like my first love when I was like a pubescent little, like what I thought was my first love, like what it counts as your first love. Why would I choose that person over the person I have spent 13 years with? Well, for me, 13 years. And I love him very much, and we've built a life and we've grown together. Why would I choose someone else? This seems like a silly choice. It's got an 80% on Rotten Tomatoes. Keeper is currently still in theaters. And I think The Carpenter's Son is still playing in theaters. The movie is a supernatural thriller loosely based on the infancy gospel of Thomas, depicting the teenage years of Jesus Christ as he heals with his powers and family conflicts while on the run from demonic forces in Roman Europe. It has gotten really bad reviews. It's at like at a 34% on Rotten Tomatoes. But you know what? I don't listen to those people. I'm not listening to them when it comes to horror. We've got Nicolas Cage in this. Nicolas fucking Cage. I know that this movie is good. I don't have to read a review to know that this movie is going to be good and that I will enjoy it. So I will still haven't seen it, but I am going to see this movie. Shelby Oaks, Good Boy, and Dream Eater are all on streaming now. I haven't seen any of them. Honestly, I haven't been watching the new horror movies now that I'm not worried about making the reviews, which, I mean, it was just like another thing for me to do on top of the actual research and things that I'm doing. So I'm so glad that I stopped doing that. And I'm only watching the ones that like I'm really interested in or have time for. And I'll eventually get around to all of them, but I am not worried about it, which is such a relief now. There are so many other people already doing that are doing that really well. I don't need to also do that. I am going to be switching slowly. I'm switching to 2 episodes on my theme of the month and then 2 episodes with an indie horror highlight. I have some indie horror directors I've already talked to that they are going to be coming on my podcast next month. I'll have those episodes coming out. If you have an indie horror movie that you would like to talk with me about, you would like to get into the themes of your movie and what it took to make that film, this magnificent thing that is so hard, like so complicated to do, especially if you're an indie horror director. It's not an easy task, no matter what the film is. If you're an indie filmmaker, this is your passion. You don't do it because you're making money. If anything, you're putting yourself in a hole. I want to be able to support those people who are putting themselves out there, taking risks, and really putting themselves in a hell of a lot of debt, whether they're indebted to contributors or they are personally emptying their pockets for their film. I want to be able to give you a little highlight. I want to be able to amplify you a little bit so that people can find you. When it comes to indie horror, it's not about it being the best movie of the year. It's not about it being the best shot or the best script. It's about sharing your passion for filmmaking and creativity. So if you have something like that you want to talk to me about, you can email me at screamqueenpodcaster@gmail.com. I am currently looking for people to talk to for the month of February. This is a weekly podcast with new episodes out every Friday. All the research, writing, and audio is done by yours truly. This is a one-woman show, and I am doing my very best. Please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen. It really means a lot. You can find me on Instagram at Scream Queen Podcaster, Blue Sky at Scream Queen Podcast, TikTok at Scream Queen Podcast, and there's a link tree that will take you to my YouTube and Facebook page as well. Remember, only consume what you need, and don't let greed overtake your humanity. Until next time, goodbye.